Tonight, we're going to talk about that, first with Sarah Palin. So, Sarah, you're a government person. How did you learn that?
Oh, heaven forbid you call me a government person. Ugh. And by the way, I've got your book too, and I dog-eared the heck out of it last night as I flew cross-country from New York back to Alaska. Excellent book. It really got me excited about some solutions that at least you, John, espouse, and more voters need to kind of get a hold of this idea that no, government isn't the solution. Like Reagan said, government too often is the problem. And I want to argue with you on one point, though, that you made specifically in the book, and hopefully we'll get to that. But in the meantime, I'll tell you, the examples that you give throughout this book really shed light on how nonsensical government is in assuming that its role is way beyond what our Constitution allows, especially federal centralized government to be.
And the people you were hanging around with this week on the Today Show, all those socialists, they have no clue about these ideas.
You know what? This is all our fault, though, John. As long as we continue as voters to keep sending people to Washington, D.C., these yahoos who basically are just promising to bring home more of the bacon for their districts, for their congressional areas, then we have no one to blame but us as voters. I know up here in Alaska, specifically, that has been campaign promises by our congressional delegation is they'd bring home more bacon than the next guy, and we keep voting them back into office.
And Alaska is an unusually libertarian state, at least compared to the other states. And you've been sympathetic to Ron Paul and some of these libertarian ideas. Does that include things like drug legalization, legalization of sex work, prostitution for adults?
Well, first, when we just talk about the fiscal issues, let me give you an example of up here in Alaska. When I put the kibosh on the bridge to nowhere when I was the governor, I was publicly chewed out by our congressional delegation, by the delegation letting the press know, and then the press let voters know, that I was going to make their job more difficult in bringing home more money to Alaska. And of course, I was trying to make the point, but you know, our country's going to be insolvent. The federal government won't have money to share with Alaska if we keep going down the road that we're going. Accumulating debt to the tune of $3 million a minute now, that's where we are, John. We're not going to be able to sustain this.
$3 million a minute is a good, clear way to make people think about it. But you didn't answer my question on the more uncomfortable social issues. Drugs, prostitution.
Well, yeah, you know, and you take even more of a stronger libertarian view than I do on some of those issues, like the war on drugs. I happen to believe that we need to continue to do all that we can to discourage drug use, especially with our youth. I would like to see, though, law enforcement prioritize its time and resources and not go out and bust a guy in his house, maybe smoking a joint, who's not doing anybody else any harm, and in the meantime go out and find the bad guys and, you know, try to help keep society safe that way. Just prioritize, use common sense.
All right, I'm dropping that and moving to something where we agree, I think. You're a hunter. I don't know if you got to the part of the book where we talk about if you want to save tigers, eat them, which isn't exactly true, but it's been shown that these conservation efforts have not worked. Tigers are disappearing in Asia, but where people are allowed to own tigers, to have the tribe controlling those tigers, to allow tourism or even hunting, then the local people work to fight the poachers and preserve the animals. Do you agree with that?
You had really good points in that chapter about conservation, and you gave the good example about the bison also. You know, once such an endangered species, and now once we were able to privatize basically the management of that species, they are now, relatively speaking, in abundance. But this is the point that I did want to argue a little bit, because as a commercial fisherman, what I have seen firsthand is, for instance, Japanese trawlers coming in and pretty much raping the bottom of the ocean floor before there was strict regulation on overfishing, and these Japanese trawlers with 20-mile-long nets being able to overfish and then waste the bycatch. The rest of us, as commercial fishermen, you know, we'd sit there saying, well, pretty soon there is not going to be a species left for us to help feed the rest of the world. So how is it, John, and no doubt you have the answer, how can government manage for sustainability and for abundance for future use of a commonly held resource like fisheries?
Well, it's a problem, and that's why we call it the tragedy of the commons. When nobody owns it, everybody takes as much as they can get, and the only way is somehow to give people some sort of ownership right over this part of the ocean or this many fish. And my understanding is it's been done with lobsters, but it's tougher in the ocean with fish that cover big distances.
Then, we have to make sure that government has some appropriate resource then to manage until, you know, we figure out a better way to get people to not abuse a resource or abuse the environment. How is it that we're going to allow government to efficiently use a limited resource that we have, that's tax dollars? We do that by electing people who will engage in common sense and quit wasting money on all these other frivolous, burdensome, overreaching aspects, which I'd say is about 90% of what the federal government is engaged in.
Governor Palin, thanks for joining us. Thanks for reading my book.
It's an excellent book. It really is. Just let me sum up real quick, though. One sentence that you wrote in here that people need to understand is that your intuition tempts us all to believe that politicians will eventually wise up and come up with a reasonable budget so that America won't go broke. But what reality teaches us, as you pointed out, John, is that the government's budget really has little to do with bookkeeping, cost-benefit analysis, reality, or even sanity. We've got to change that, John, or we're going under.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Palin, and I sure hope we change it.
Thank you.